This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a system that quietly convinced itself it would never have to enforce its own rules. And tonight, that system hesitated. Just for a moment, long enough to expose the danger. What you are watching is not chaos. It is something colder than that. It is a test of whether authority still works when the subject refuses to recognize it. A test of whether power still bends when it is ordered to. A test of whether consequences are real or merely theatrical. For years, the assumption was simple. Delay long enough, escalate loud enough, and the system will blink. That assumption shaped behavior. It shaped silence. It shaped risk. Tonight, the assumption cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. Stay with me, because what follows is not resolution. It is exposure. And once you see what is actually failing here, you cannot unsee it. This moment does not end anything. It begins the dangerous part. The mistake is thinking this system runs on elections or personalities or even ideology. It doesn't. What actually controls it now is delay. Process stretched until it becomes protection. Rules slowed down until they lose force. Authority outsourced to patience. This is how power learned to survive scrutiny, not by winning arguments, but by exhausting the mechanism meant to judge it. Every institution involved knows this rhythm. File, appeal, pause, negotiate, repeat until urgency dissolves. Over time, enforcement becomes optional. Not officially, practically, and when enough people operate inside that assumption, it stops being corruption. It becomes normal function. That's the frame you have to hold here. Not a dramatic confrontation, a quiet standoff between momentum and inertia. Because when a system built on delay suddenly demands obedience, it creates a problem it no longer knows how to solve, especially when the subject has learned that time is the real shield. That's where we are. And the next shift didn't announce itself. It slipped in slowly. The most dangerous changes don't arrive as emergencies. They arrive as accommodations. There was a time when defying an order triggered consequences quickly. The response was automatic, predictable, almost boring. Now, defiance is treated as a negotiation, a press strategy, a waiting game. Before, institutions moved on principle. Now, they move on risk assessment. What will this provoke? What will this inflame? What will this cost? That shift didn't happen overnight. It happened case by case, exception by exception, each one defensible on its own, until the exception became the rule. Slow erosion is harder to detect than collapse. There's no siren, no single moment to point to, just a growing gap between authority on paper and authority in practice. And when someone finally tests that gap openly, the system faces a choice it has been avoiding: enforce now and admit delay was a mistake, or hesitate again and confirm that obedience is optional. That choice is no longer theoretical. And the first shock came faster than anyone expected. The shock was not dramatic. That's what made it dangerous. A directive was issued, clear, immediate, no ambiguity about what was required. And instead of compliance, there was resistance. Not loud at first, procedural, carefully worded. This is the moment most people miss because it didn't look like a crisis. It looked like paperwork, but inside the system, alarms were going off. This wasn't about the material being requested. It was about what refusal now meant. After years of delay, after every allowance had already been spent, for the first time, the institution was forced to confront the cost of its own patience. If it backed down again, the order would mean nothing. Not just this one, all of them. So the language hardened. Options narrowed. Consequences were spelled out without theatrics. And suddenly, what had been theoretical became physical. Compliance was no longer symbolic. It had teeth. Stay with me. Because this was never about enforcement alone. It was about whether the system could still compel reality to respond. And once that line is crossed, there is no quiet way back. This is where the mechanism reveals itself. The system does not collapse when laws are broken. It collapses when enforcement becomes negotiable. What actually happens behind the scenes is simple. Risk is redistributed. Institutions absorb hesitation. They absorb delay. They absorb public anger. And in return, the individual accumulates leverage. Every day without consequence increases bargaining power. Every unanswered order reframes defiance as strategy. Eventually, obedience looks irrational. This is not an accident. It is an incentive structure. Those with resources can wait. They can litigate time itself. They can turn procedure into armor. The damage doesn't disappear. It moves outward. Courts become careful. Agencies become cautious. Officials become silent. And the cost is paid elsewhere, by legitimacy, by precedent, by the quiet understanding that rules apply unevenly. That is who benefits, and that is who absorbs the risk. Which is why when the system finally moves, it doesn't do so gently. It moves all at once, and that sudden movement creates the next rupture. Now the pace changes. There is no more space for calibration, no more room for soft language. Timelines compress. Options collapse. What had been handled in memos is now handled in hours. What was abstract becomes logistical. Every delay now creates exposure. Every statement is weighed. Every move is visible. The system is no longer managing optics. It is managing outcomes. That shift is destabilizing because acceleration reveals weakness. Coordination becomes harder. Control fragments, miscalculation becomes likely. This is the phase where mistakes multiply. Not because of malice, but because speed punishes hesitation. There is no elegant way to reverse this. Once momentum replaces discretion, the system cannot pretend it is still choosing. And here is the critical point. Acceleration does not resolve tension. It concentrates it, which means the next impact will not land where people expect. It will land where the system is least prepared to absorb it. And that impact is not institutional. It's personal. This is where it reaches you, not as a headline, not as a spectacle, as a shift in how the system treats uncertainty. You feel it when institutions stop explaining and start acting, when timelines shorten without warning, when decisions arrive fully formed. That distance creates anxiety because silence feels like concealment. Even when it isn't, you are asked to trust a process you are no longer allowed to watch in real time. And trust is harder when the stakes are this high. Stay with me here, because this is not about sympathy or outrage. It's about exposure. When enforcement accelerates, collateral effects spread, markets react, rhetoric sharpens, pressure radiates downward. You are not in the room where these decisions are made, but you absorb the consequences. This is how systemic stress becomes lived experience, not through collapse, through compression. And once that pressure reaches the public layer, it doesn't release cleanly. It moves outward. Once pressure escapes the domestic system, it doesn't stop at the border because institutions elsewhere are watching. Quietly, closely, they are not reacting to personalities. They are measuring reliability. When enforcement hesitates, allies recalibrate. When it accelerates suddenly, markets flinch. Stability is not judged by intention. It's judged by predictability. And right now, predictability is fractured. This is how a local confrontation becomes a global signal. Not through speeches, through behavior. Financial systems price in uncertainty faster than voters do. Security partners plan for contingencies before they are announced. Every pause, every surge is read as data. What they see is a system correcting late, forcefully, without a clear off-ramp. That creates ripple effects the system cannot control. Capital moves, alliances hedge, narratives harden, And once uncertainty is exported, it doesn't come back smaller. It comes back amplified, which means the next phase is no longer about control, it's about trajectory. And trajectories only narrow from here. From here, the system has three possible paths, not outcomes, paths. The first is adjustment. The system absorbs the shock. Enforcement holds. Procedures reassert themselves, not cleanly, not gracefully, but enough to restore a working equilibrium. The second is erosion. Compliance happens, but legitimacy does not recover. Every step forward feels coerced. Every decision deepens distrust. The rules exist, but belief in them thins. And then there is rupture. That's the path no one names out loud. Acceleration meets resistance. Authority meets defiance. And neither side yields in time. In rupture, enforcement succeeds, but at a cost that cannot be undone. Precedent hardens. Norms shatter. The system survives, but changed. None of these paths are chosen deliberately. They emerge from timing, from restraint or the lack of it, from whether momentum is slowed or allowed to run. Right now, all three remain possible, which is what makes this moment dangerous. Because the final shape of what comes next will not be decided by intent. It will be decided by what happens under pressure, and that pressure has not peaked yet. There is a temptation at moments like this to look for closure, for reassurance, for a sense that the system has corrected itself. That temptation is dangerous because nothing here has resolved. The order exists. The resistance exists. The consequences remain conditional. What has changed is not the outcome, it's the exposure. We can now see the fault line clearly between authority that assumes compliance and power that tests whether it is real. That fault line does not disappear once crossed. It widens. Watch what happens next. Not for spectacle, for signal. Watch how quickly silence replaces explanation. Watch which institutions move first. Watch where hesitation appears. If you want to understand what kind of system this is becoming, you don't look at declarations. You look at enforcement. You look at who blinks. Stay with this story. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is unfinished. The next phase will not announce itself. It will arrive quietly. And by the time it is obvious, the direction will already be set. If you want to see what comes after exposure, follow what happens next.